welcome back to another episode of The Socially Distant Lawyer. I'm Mitch Hayes.
And I'm Greg Vinogradsky.
And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Grieving Families Act. The Grieving Families Act was recently vetoed by the governor from New York. It was passed by the legislature in January of 21 and vetoed in the end of January of 2023. Greg, why don't you go over what the Wrongful Death Act was supposed to accomplish?
Sure. So it was basically going to be a reform of the current law as it exists, which kind of dated back to the Civil War and had some real limitations as far as what parties could recover in the event that somebody's loved one or what have you died. And so we'll go in a little bit specifics, but essentially it just gave a completely different picture of who can recover and what they can recover. And we'll kind of go into a little bit about why it was vetoed and what we can expect from there. So why don't you just give a little bit more specifics about it?
Sure. So let's talk about one of the first things that was going to be changed from the statute. The statute of limitations was a big provision. So the statute of limitations is the amount of time that you have to file a claim before you're completely barred. Generally, it was 2 years under the wrongful death statute. Now, with this amendment, it would have been 3 years and 6 months. So that would have been a larger time gap, which would have potentially allowed more suits to occur. So what else was going to change? Now, the amounts awarded was a big area of concern. Generally, under the older law that Greg was mentioning, you can recover pecuniary damages, medical expenses, and funeral expenses on behalf of the decedent. Now, there would be funeral expenses, medical expenses, grief and anguish allowed to be recovered, pecuniary losses, and the big ones are loss of consortium and companionship, guidance, education, and assistance. So we're broadening and expanding the types of recovery that can be permitted under this act. Greg, now why don't you talk about who could potentially have recovered?
Sure. So previously, it would be the state, the personal representative that would typically bring this type of action. And there'd be pretty significant limitations as far as who could recover for these types of losses. And as Mitch mentioned, it's pecuniary stuff, things you can quantify, right? Loss of income, funeral expenses, things like that. So now the new law sought to kind of expand that and really bring in, obviously it would have been spouses, but now we're talking grandparents. Obviously it would have been children. But now are we talking uncles? Are we talking aunts, close cousins? We don't know because it's really kind of broad. It's defined as, a surviving close family member. So you better believe that there's going to be a lot of litigation about what that means, right? So that's a big expansion again on what was previously a pretty limited law. And I think it's going to be interesting kind of to find out through the courts if this ever does get reformed a little bit and pass through. What exactly, all of these little definitions are going to mean going through court system.
And so what do we anticipate happening? Well, we anticipate this bill from the Civil War being updated, or the law from the Civil War being updated. How it's being updated is going to be the big question. The governor, as part of her veto, discussed how there was not, in her opinion, enough research and enough review of the detriments of the law, what the effects of this law were going to be from a societal standpoint, companies, corporations, health insurance companies. And while the governor was very keen on supporting people who had lost loved ones, there's just some revamp that need to be done based on what was put forward.
And one more interesting part of what the existing law said was that it was going to retroactively apply, right? So that means that if you had a loved one die maybe a year or two ago, this law would have applied to you. So obviously that's an issue because, as attorneys, when we're looking to defend a case, if you have maybe a case that's pre-suit or just filed and a new law comes in that starts applying to what you're doing, your case valuations are different and your entire litigation strategy might be kind of thrown off because all of this is fresh and all of this is new. So plaintiff's bar is going to obviously seek to expand it and broaden as much as possible the amount of recovery that they could have.
So we expect to see something else come through the legislature probably fairly soon. We'll make sure to keep our eyes out for you, update you as it goes. And until next time, take care.